Kia ora, welcome everybody. Hey, hope you've all had a good day. Kia ora, thanks for joining us everybody.
Kia ora.
Hey, hey Rudy.
Hi.
And while we're waiting for people to join, if you wanted to pop in the chat, hello, where you're from, and 5 words or less, what brought you here today? That would be an awesome warm-up just while we're waiting. So just your name, where you're from, shout out to anybody, and 5 words or less, what brought you here today? And then we'll just wait for a few stragglers. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Lindsay, nice to have you with us. Principal made us. Ooh, I hope your principal's not on the call. So if you've just joined us, say hi in the chat, and 5 words or less, what brought you here today? And well done all those people who've muted on entry. You get a gold shiny star from me. That's a shout outs for Kathryn there. Nice. How are we doing on numbers, Jen? Good. Okay, we'll just give it another minute and then we'll make a start. We are recording the workshop, so if life calls you away, or young people or old people call you away, it's fine, you'll get the recording afterwards. You won't miss a thing. Again, just pop in the chat what brought you here today, 5 words or less, and say hi. Okay. Right, I'm going to make a start. So first of all, thank you everybody who's muted. That's really, really good kaupapa for this session. And I'd also like to start with a karakia. Me ino tātou. Kia hore te morino, kia whakapapa paunamo te moana. Hei hurahi me tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou, ia tātou katoa. Āmene. Kei nei maunga whakahi, kei nei wā tokukiri, kei nei mā te waka o te motu, ka nui te mihi. Kia ora and welcome to Cognition Education's webinar, The Neuroscience Behind Happy Learners. Ko Rebecca toko ingoa, so my name's Rebecca Thomas. I'm passionate about education and I really enjoy supporting schools with well-being. Today, we're going to be exploring the effects of trauma and unpacking how leaders and teachers can support children to thrive in the classroom by building that resilience, which I'm sure every teacher on the planet would agree is particularly pertinent right now. And I know, in fact, a recent report from Dame Alison Peacock's team over in the UK is actually advocating to their government and policymakers that teachers should be well equipped to deal with trauma in the future. And they're trying to make sure that trauma training is a natural part of their teacher pathway. On the call, we're due to have approximately 150 people, which is fabulous, and we warmly welcome you and appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day to be here with us. Just make sure your microphone's on mute, pop any questions you may have for Kathryn in the chat. We'll try to refer to these throughout the session, but we'll also have a Q&A at the end. And we have the wonderful Tracy Lawson on the call. Tracy, do you want to unmute and say hi quickly?
Kia ora katoa, ahi Māori. I'll be looking after the chat, but I will be muted occasionally because, as you can hear, I've got some dogs in the background. and it's 3:30, so kids are coming home from school in my area. So my guard threshold is on high alert.
Kia ora, thanks Tracy. Usually we do like to do a whanaungatanga activity, but with this many participants, it's not going to be good for anybody's well-being. So those who've just joined us, just pop your name in the chat, your location you're from, and 5 words or less that brought you here today. And don't forget, if somebody calls you away from the call, it's all good. We're recording it and we will send it to you afterwards. Now, I'm sure most people on this call know who Kathryn is and may have even heard her talk before. But for those of you new to hearing her, you are in for a real treat. I was fortunate enough to meet Kathryn way back in 2019, and I was absolutely captivated by the messages she shared around neuroscience. And I remember thinking, how come every teacher in the world hasn't heard this? And why wasn't neuroscience part of my initial teacher training? Then again, in 2022, I managed to gate crash a Ministry of Education event in Whangarei, just so I could hear her talk again. And I remember Kathryn spoke candidly about what it's like to have 2 teenage children. As a mother, I have 2 teenagers too. But she also drew my attention to the natural way that a marae helps build strong connections and relationships right from an early age. After this encounter, I was like, I want to hear more, I want to hear more. So I got hooked on Peel and Kathryn's Livable podcast. Peel refers to Kathryn as his brainy mate, rightly so, I think. And the series is called I've Got Questions. If you haven't added it to your playlist, do so. It's a must, because the conversation and adorable sidekick relationship they have between each other, but whilst they're unpacking the effect of trauma, is an absolute must. Anyway, enough from me. I'd warmly like to welcome the wonderful Kathryn Becket. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. And thanks for sharing the podcast with Peel. Honestly, if nobody listened to them, we'd keep producing them because they're just so much fun. And he tries to keep me real, which is really nice. So thanks for suggesting that you're enjoying them, because that's why we do it. So kia ora, yes, my name is Kathryn Becket, and I love this information absolutely and utterly. So it's so nice when I hear the passion of other people hearing it as well. And thanks for the little messages coming through and people saying they've heard me before. Absolutely, we can hear this information again and again and again. And actually currently what I'm doing at the moment is going through all of my old recordings of Dr. Bruce Perry, who I trained with, and just listening to all of our trainings again. And I'm just going, wow, I'd forgotten that, or that's right, like refreshing on that. So this stuff can be heard a million times. Now we've got a short amount of time and we really want to build on this amazing information about resilience. So I'll do a really quick intro, but you're absolutely right, Rebecca. I've got 2 beautiful adolescents, and in a nutshell, I make lots of mistakes with them. I'm struggling. Today has been texting at my son. Are you in class? Yes, I am. Teacher said you're absent. No, I'm there. Okay, are you in the next class? Maybe not. Yep, maybe I didn't get to that one. And constantly trying to keep him engaged in this education system that is absolutely not engaging him one iota. And so I've got massive struggles as a parent with my adolescents, but I also absolutely adore them, and they are both really amazing kids. My daughter's 18, my son's 15, and I adore them, and they are going to be absolutely fine. But navigating through the education system is one of the hardest things we will ever do. So the more that we can understand, the better. So as I go through, I can't see your faces. When I put the slide show up, I can only see 2 or 3 people. So you're welcome to turn off your cameras. You can turn them back on when we get to question time, etc. So whatever makes you feel comfortable. We've just been talking about how tiring it is to watch people on screens. If you've had a big day and if you are tired, don't look at me. You can see the slide. My slides are very simple. Then look away, and it gives your brain a rest rather than trying to watch me all the time, whatever makes you comfortable. I also saw quite a few messages coming around diverse needs. I will sort of talk about diverse needs, but what I have to do in a short amount of time is generalize and be really sort of overarching. So I will put in some stuff about diverse needs, but I'm not going to be able to expand out. I talk about the piece of information as a pebble in the water, and there's ripples, right? And I can talk about 1 or 2 of the ripples, but there's 100 ripples that we could talk about if we had the time, and that's where we get into real diverse needs into that space. So just to appreciate the fact that this is about the generalized, and in the questions you can ask about diverse, but just to be sure that I'm not going to talk about diverse every time. I can train for days and days and days, which is pretty cool when I get the chance to, but this is going to be a little bit more getting to the point. So I'm going to put my slideshow up. I've sent out a copy of the slideshow, so you're more than welcome to it. There's also at the end, I'll show you the links to my website and stuff like that. And there's things on there that you can refer to. And we'll have the questions at the end. But as was mentioned from Rebecca, if you want to throw in a question at any time, lovely Tracy will, stop me and say there's a really important question that we need to talk through, whatever you guys make sure you keep yourselves happy. Happy learners, good learners, see? So just on the front is my qualifications, because theoretically that's important. Masters of Educational Psychology, love doing that, but most of this information is based in the neurosequential model of therapeutics, which is a gentleman, Dr. Bruce Perry, who I mentioned. He is the one who trained me in that. And if you are interested in this, reading the book, What Happened to You? Dr. Perry and Oprah Winfrey wrote that together, and there's an amazing chapter on an epiphany he had in New Zealand, and that was whilst he was spending time on a marae in the far north. And he not bases all his neurosequential model of therapeutics on that, but that was a big part of him learning the most important thing about healing is connection, not medicalizing, but personalizing. So he had a massive epiphany in New Zealand, which is beautiful to understand. So the NMT stuff is most of where my information today bases into it, ripples out from that. So if you've seen my sessions before, I'm going to do this in a much more sort of succinct way when I talk about red brain, green brain. If you've seen it before, then you'll know this stuff. Repetition is good for the brain. But I'm going to, if you want to listen to this in more detail, I do other trainings around the country. But basically, I divide the brain into two. Red brain, green brain, make it really simple. If you've been lucky enough to see Nathan McCarty-Wallace, he will talk about 4 brains. Absolutely fine. If that's how you want to talk about it, talk about 4 brains. We don't have an absolute division in the brain. I just go red and green, makes sense. So the red brain is all of those lower parts of the brain, which are very about survival, about instinctual, procedural, stuff we don't have to think about. So it's the unconscious parts of the brain, if you want to generalize in that space. So very impulsive and irrational in that brain. It's essentially the capacity that a 2-year-old has. So a 2-year-old is very impulsive, irrational, very selfish about themselves, about the here and now. The green brain is the frontal cortex area, the executive functioning, some people will call it. So in there, we do all of those really thinking things, the logical, rational stuff, the stuff that we're conscious of. So overriding impulses. Should I, shouldn't I? No, I shouldn't. That's done in the green brain. We plan, sequence, do time management in the green brain. If we want to feel empathy for someone, that is operated out of the green brain. Now, the whole brain works together, by the way. This is just the final sort of part of the process is done with the green brain. What we want to talk about when we're talking about resilience, and this is the main idea today, is understanding how do we build resilience? We're going to talk about what resilience actually looks like. And I was training a group the other day and they said, we teach our kids to bounce back. And I'm not saying don't do that, but for them, they were finding that really difficult because they had adolescents who were very concrete thinkers and they were talking about bouncing back. How do you bounce back? What does that look like? And I think if we're going to teach something, we have to ask, are we teaching something we can see and understand? So what we're going to talk about with resilience is the ability to get our bodies to return to state of calm. And that's what resilience is. And we're going to go over this again and again. Why I'm saying that is because what we have to first do is understand about our body going into tension. Understand our body going into an activated state, because that's the opposite of going into a calm state. Do you see? So we go into tension and then we go into calm. If we do this again and again in a okay way, and we're going to describe that, we become resilient. The issue is if our body goes into high levels of tension again and again and again, this is when we start talking about toxic stress, those sorts of words. That's when we start talking about trauma. So this is why it's really important to understand all of this, because me going into stress and calming down is actually going to build my resilience. That's a brilliant thing. I should be putting myself under stress. I should find things to challenge me. I should put my kids into spaces and not save them and make sure that they're sorting themselves out. That's resilience building. But if my body's going into overactivation of stress, that's where we start talking about that word trauma. So can you see it's not about getting rid of stress, it's about understanding it so we can find that beautiful balance. And that's why we need to understand the neuroscience of stress so that we can understand what resilience looks like. And that's why we have to be aware of how individualizing this process is. I'm never going to say a 7-year-old, this is how you deal with them with stress, and the 10-year-old, this is how you deal with them. Do you understand? I'm going to tell you about us as individuals, and we need to individualize that. So to generalize this, we're going to talk about how our brain can go from this green, rational, empathic, time management, being able to sort out all this stuff, be, futuristic in our green brain, or we could slide right down into that red brain. And I often tell the story, and if you've been to one of my sessions, I talk about how when we lose our keys, and when we lose our keys, the body activates into a bit of stress. Uh-oh, lost my keys. There's danger in this environment. And we start to activate a little bit further down that stress response continuum. Introducing the sandpapered brain. Sandpapered brain comes from the understanding that my hand right now, if I touch it, doesn't hurt. If for some reason I took a piece of sandpaper and sandpapered my hand, now when I applied the same amount of touch, that hand would hurt a little bit. Not because of the touch, because of the state of my brain. And so what we need to understand is that everything in our environment that activates a little bit of a reaction from us can be considered a sandpaper. We've got little sandpapers, we've got really high grade sandpapers. But everything can be a sandpaper. And at the moment, and I've got to put this into every session I do at the moment, I would say 99%, I'd go 100, but I can't ever be 100%. 99% of you have got sandpapers when we think about our future. Because at the moment, none of us knows what tomorrow is going to look like. But what the issue is because all of us have the same sandpaper, we sort of think, oh, well, that's okay, everybody's going through it. Well, how ridiculous is that? If you're sandpapered, I'm sandpapered, we're both actually sandpapered. And what we're going to talk about is resilience is about recognizing the sandpaper and saying, what do I do about it? I do something to activate myself back to calm. Instead of ignoring it, nullifying it, saying it's not happening, we say it is happening. It is in my world. This is stressful for our students coming back to school if their parents might be thinking this. It is stressful for them coming back, not knowing if tomorrow they're going to have to be back at home. It is stressful, but it's tolerably stressful. It's not a biggie if we accept it and then get ourselves back to calm. And this is what sandpapers are. But what happens is if we don't acknowledge the sandpaper, what happens? We sandpaper, we sandpaper, we sandpaper, and eventually that same touch is now going to absolutely hurt. So you get home from work after a beautiful day and you've had a fantastic day and everything's gone right, and somebody says to you, oh, what's for dinner? You might say, well, actually, you've been home all day. So in fact, I think it's possibly you could start it. So that activation, what they've done to you, said what's for dinner, and your hand is really calm, you've got your brain's in a really good position, it's right up in that green brain, you go, actually, why don't you sort it out? What happens if your brain's sandpapered, and they say, what's for dinner? It's the same question. It's the same question. You've been home all day, why can't you sort out the dinner? The email you got the other day, and you read it and you went, oh, that's so rude. How can that person expect me to do this or whatever? And then you leave it, hopefully. And the next day you get there and you've been, you had your coffee, you sit down and you read it and you go, actually, that's not that offensive at all. I wonder why I read that way. Do you see? Or you read it and you go, oh my goodness, because you've got your green brain available, that person is having such a bad time. I know that they're isolating and they've got all the other kids around. I bet you they've written this in a way that feels really offensive, but I bet you they're just in a bad space. So why don't I be really nice to them when I respond? Do you see the difference? The difference is not the pressure. The difference is the state of your hand. And what I want us to understand is that if we acknowledge sandpapers, if we respect that they're there, we say, that was a sandpaper. I am going to bring myself back to a state of calm. That's where we get resilience. But at the moment, we're getting good at nullifying stressors. Oh, that doesn't matter. Or we think a little bit of an activation is really disastrous and we start stressing out because we're feeling a little bit nervous or sad or angry or worried. So sandpapers are normal. Sandpapers are completely understandable. What we're going to do is recognize them and then help ourselves get back to that green brain. So talking about that body calming down helps green brain turn on. Because the more energy that's required in red brain, can you see the less energy we've got from green brain? And if you've lost your keys, you're looking around the house, you will go back to the same place again and again and again, because your green brain has lost the energy to be logical and rational. And so what happens eventually is you yell and scream at someone who says, where did you leave them? You know, and so we can all get to that space. And this is that understanding of the energy shift along that continuum. We can all go there. And by the way, I've been training in this for 20 or so years, and I can still lose it with my kids and be screaming and yelling and saying, well, I pay the rent here, so if you want to stay, you might want to clean up or something like that. And I train in it. Okay, so just because you know this stuff doesn't mean you can somehow miraculously not be sandpapered, but I recognize it for what it is. So that's red brain, green brain, sandpapered brain. By the way, saying I'm a bit sandpapered is a definitely better way than saying it in a different way, which we often might say it. And it's a really good thing to understand about yourselves, checking in with yourself. How am I feeling? Because by the way, if we want to be building resilience in our students, we cannot do it when we're in a red brain. You can't do it when you're in a red brain. So looking after yourself, taking your self-care, checking in with yourself and saying, I am feeling sandpapered. And that's okay, because we somehow think we have to be brave and tough and whatever. Resilience is about feeling it and coming back. Okay, so resilience, again, I've been working in this space for so many years. I sat down once, I went, what is resilience? People, every time I walk into a school, and respectfully, I bet you, if you're from a school or wherever you're from, I bet you there's somewhere on a wall somewhere, resilience. And that word resilience is everywhere. Everybody wants to be resilient. But when I ask people, what is it to be resilient? It's very hard to see it. We will work through that. But what I first want to challenge you on is, if I spent this hour, if you've never ridden a bike, okay, you've never ridden a bike, you go, Kathryn, how do I ride a bike? I could teach you for an hour how to ride a bike. I could put up some slides. I can teach you about pedaling and holding handlebars and all of that sort of stuff. I could teach you easy. What I'm teaching you is that upper part of your brain, that cognitive part of your brain, your thinking, rational part of the brain. Teaching you all of that because that's what slides and talking does. If I then put you on a bike and asked you to go out and ride it, would you be able to ride it? No, you'd fall off because your top of your brain might have learnt, but that procedural, the body learning from action hasn't happened. Do you see? What we do in our schools and in our environments and in a lot of our systems is we teach the brain at the top how to be resilient. We tell them, take a deep breath if you feel nervous, walk away from someone, tell them you don't like it, tell them that they need to be kind to you. And these things are all good, just like it would be good for me to teach you to ride a bike. It's useful. But do you see what we're not doing? We're not letting the body feel this resilience, like actually experience resilience. And this is what we're going to talk through. So I want you to start asking yourself, all of these beautiful systems we have in school, we have mana potential, we have zones of regulation, we have pause, breathe, smile, we have Jace Tipatu coming in and doing M3 beautiful stories. We have all of these things, all of it. Is it actually letting the body practice what we're teaching? And that's what I want us to start asking. Do you think their bodies are practicing this? Because we can put it all up here And then they go out and they get stressed and they fall off their bike. You know, they just actually can't do it because they haven't actually practiced it. So it's something to really ask ourselves. So the first part of resilience is 2 parts of resilience. The first part of resilience is actually holding a feeling. And that's really interesting because we are often quick to pull somebody out of a feeling. As soon as our kids are sad, angry, worried, frustrated, we find a way to divert them. We find a way to stop them feeling that. Oh, don't, that's okay. Oh, make you laugh, you know, come out of that space. Now, what we've got to do is start saying, is that actually tolerable for you? Is that okay for you to be in that space? Because if it's tolerable, we're going to talk about that word straight away, but if it's tolerable, we want to leave them there. Now, the best analogy I've got for tolerable is thinking about going to the gym and lifting a weight to increase your arm muscles. If you go to the gym and you want to increase your capacity to lift that weight, you will not go up and pick up a tiny little weight because it's just too easy. Your arm goes, oh, that was easy. And the brain goes, we don't need to build any muscle. That was easy. You don't go and pick up the biggest weight, because if you pick up the biggest weight, it will hurt your muscle. What you are asking is, which of these weights today for me will activate my muscle into a tension, into a tolerable activation? It will hurt. It will feel uncomfortable. Do you see this? But it won't be ouchy, too ouchy, and it won't, you know, be a ripping off of the muscles. So that tolerable word is one of the most important concepts we have to understand for resilience. But what it means is you have to work out what's tolerable for that person today in this moment, which is where things start to get really complicated, especially if you do have a classroom full of children. And this is why it is difficult to build resilience for someone who has very low resilience. It's difficult to build resilience for them if we've got heaps of other kids around. Can you see? Because we actually can't keep checking in what their tolerable is. This is why we do need to have smaller groups around our kids who need a lot more resilience building. And that's a really important thing to understand, because we think, oh, look, you're 14 years old, let's put you into a resilience building group with 20 other kids. Well, it's unlikely to be successful if there's only one person trying to monitor where that tolerable activation is. So that first part is holding the tolerable. So again, I want you to start asking, are you scooping them out of that space too fast? Did you need to jump in when they were feeling lonely at morning tea? Could they have actually tried a little bit harder to find a friend for themselves? Yes, they might have cried and they might have felt a bit stink, but actually, was that a learning space for them? When they were angry and they were feeling angry and they weren't doing anything destructive, did you have to make them calm down? Or could they have stayed in that anger space and just had to think about it and tried to let them come out themselves? Do you understand? So we've got to be a little bit more aware of, maybe it's okay to leave them in that feeling space if it's tolerable. And that's a really interesting thing to be thinking about as well, because it's certainly something we are less able to do for lots of reasons. And remember, there's no judgment in that space, especially if we've got 20, 30 kids that we're looking after. You want to get them out of that space as soon as possible. But we're talking about the appropriate way to build resilience. So the first part is being able to hold a tolerable feeling. The second part of resilience is activating back to calm. Okay, and one of the best ways is to take a deep breath. So what we're doing is we're activating our body to a tolerable level, and we're then activating to calm. And I want you to hear the language. Activating to a tolerable level, but we are activating our body to calm. Rather than saying, stop being stressed, or do you say it's a physical activation? I'm going to show you that it's a physical activation in our body. And this is why we actually have to practice it. One of the best ways to activate back to calm is through our breathing. Now, this is something that we don't do enough of. I know we're doing a lot more now, and we do some, and some schools do amazing, by the way. In a generalistic sense, we don't do enough of this breathing. This is something you could do. You can set up a little game with your kids or something like that, or just talk them through, or you can make a whole new analogy in this space. And this is where, if you have had Jace Tapatu come in and he talks with his M3 Māori stories and stuff like that, and using legends, he can talk about, you know, how we can calm down with breath and stuff like that, which is pretty powerful. This is just my way of storing it. I talk about this whole body connected up. So our whole body's connected up, our spleen, our liver, our kidney, our heart, our lungs, our stomach, they're all connected through this vagus nerve. Now, any biologists, this next statement is not anatomically correct. It's just an analogy, okay? So we've got two teams. I'll tell you what the teams stand for, but at the moment, the people on the teams are a liver, a kidney, a heart, a spleen, and a lung, right? So it's not anatomically correct. But what I want us to understand is that all of these organs are on the same team. They are connected. So when our sympathetic activation is going up, we're in this fight-flight response. When our red brain is starting to activate and we think there's something wrong in the environment, we start to activate a survival response. And one of them is this fight-flight response. So our heart rate's up, our lung capacity is going higher. Uh-oh, I'm in danger. The other response we can do when we think we're in danger is to play dead. And that's along this parasympathetic freeze response. It's when our body really slows down the heart. So at the end of each of these, they're quite dangerous situations, and this full activation or this full deactivation. They're quite, you don't want to be in either of those spaces. What we want is we want to balance them. So if your heart rate's up, your lung capacity's up, you're in this state of sympathetic activation, I want you to get one member of the team to start pulling that tug of war back this way to try and balance you out. And if I asked you to get your kidney to start activating to calm, not sure you could. And I often ask people to point to where your spleen is. And most people would, I don't even know exactly where your spleen is either. So, you know, like, can you see how we can't activate those parts of this vagus system? Can you activate your heart to pump it slower? You can't talk to your heart. There is one organ in this entire system that we can manipulate. If we take a deep breath, we are pulling this tug of war this way. And can you see what happens when the lungs start pulling this way? The rest of the team come with them. And your liver starts to activate better, and your kidney starts to activate better. Your heart rate slows down. Your stomach starts to digest food again. Your bowel and your bladder start to process instead of needing to go to the toilet and flush everything out. You will feel a physical change in your entire body if you manipulate your lungs into a calmer state, okay? And once we start to understand this, you understand how essential it is that we get better and better at being able to control our breathing from higher and higher levels. You cannot go into a full stress response and think that you can breathe from that state. It's just not really possible. Do you see? So how amazing is that to know that breathing brings us down? And just in that sentence, I've shown you how by being in a stress response, our kidney, our liver, our spleen, which are cleaning organs in the body, are not working when we're in stress response. Our heart rate is up. Our stomach is not processing food properly, so we're not getting the proper energy out of it. Our bowel and bladder is having issues. So can you see, if you stay in this stress response, if you stay in the sandpapered brain for a long period of time, you know what happens at the end of the term when you go on holiday and finally stop? You haven't been cleansing, you haven't been looking after yourself, and your body is fully open to picking up every single bug that is floating around because you've been in this state of activation. And this is again why we have to work on our resilience, which is recognizing stressors, recognizing sandpapers and saying, that's a sandpaper. I am going to do something kind to myself this weekend, tonight, not wait for the holiday. Do you see? I'm going to see if I can get my body into this state of calm right now, because now it means my spleen's working better. And I love thinking like that. And it's a bit weird, but you take a deep breath. Oh, my kidney's back on, And so it's quite amazing to think that. But can you see how powerful breathing is? And that is one of the most important things about bringing us back to calm. But other things bring us back to calm. Singing a song, doing that line from the karakia, thinking about your grandma because she's the one that makes you feel safe. Like all of these things. And we've got all these imageries and we've got all of these ways of calming yourself down. But resilience, holding that tolerable and calming down. And this is what we need to practice in the body. And if we do this again and again and again, we get better and better, and we can do it from higher and higher levels. You can go to the gym now and you can pick up a heavier weight and a heavier weight and a heavier weight because you've pushed yourself into that tension. What we're doing in our world at the moment, and there's lots of reasons for it, but what we're doing is we are sending the parent to the gym with them, and the parent is saying, don't you pick up that weight. It's going to hurt your muscle. I'll pick it up for you. Or as schools, and there's lots of reasons for this. I'm not being judgy in the space. I'm just being honest. We say, actually, if you come to school, there are no weights. We don't need weights at our school because they hurt. So we won't make you lose. We won't talk about failure. We won't push you into that space. We don't do anything that would make you sad. Do you see? And can you see how this is not resilience building? But we don't want to make them really sad. We make them tolerably sad. We make them not really anxious, but we make them tolerably anxious. And this is what we've got to start doing, recognizing how important it is to allow those emotions to happen. Because if we don't, we're going to the gym and there's no weights there and there ain't no learning happening. And this is what we're doing in our world. We're taking them all away, or we're lifting them for them. And it's a natural behavior from parents, by the way. Absolutely. And I know I'm talking as in a parent space, but parents' desires dictate what we do within our education system a lot. And by the way, I myself have to step back all the time from running in and fixing everything for my kids. So I'm not saying there's judgment on anyone who does it, but we do have to start thinking about, are we doing the right thing? Should we save this person from this space, or could they potentially get themselves out of it? So developing emotional resilience, this is where we get into the nitty gritty of what it looks like, and remember what it feels like. And as much as we could teach someone this in their brain, we have to make sure that their bodies are feeling it. So what we want is we want to create multiple moments of tolerable stress. Now, multiple talks to the fact that the brain has to repeat before it learns. All of our life, we're repeating new learning. So multiple moments, we've talked about what tolerable is, but it has to be in the presence of someone who makes you feel safe, who gets you, who understands what you need. And that's the attuned relationship. So the first 3 years were the most important time for building emotional resilience. And I'm going to tell you one of the most important games we played to build resilience in our babies. Boo. When we did this, can you see what happens if baby is laying there? Baby is searching the environment. And the most important thing for them to know is that they're safe. Okay, it's good, I'm safe. When you go like this, as far as I'm concerned, you've left. So they will activate a bit of sandpaper, a little bit of the stress response. They'll go, uh-oh, they've gone. I could be in danger here. And their little bodies tense and their eyes dilate, and they're in a little bit of this fight-flight response. But what you do is within a millisecond, you're back. And their little body goes, oh, and it activates back down to calm. What you have done in that moment is physically activated their body into a state of stress tolerably, and then you have physically activated their body to calm with the presence of that you're back and they're safe again. And then you do it again and again and again. And when this happens in the brain, we get a little euphoric dopamine feedback. Ping, you did it. And if you actually watch them, you'll see their body tense, you'll see their body relax, and then you'll see them little giggle because they've just got this little dopamine feedback. How amazing is nature? How amazing are we as humans when we keep in touch with, ourselves and live in sort of more naturally sort of spaces. So, and then you have to hide behind the whole desk because they're not scared anymore. But do you see what you're doing? You're tolerably increasing that weight, which is the time you're away. And so that weight increases in response to the young person, by the way. We don't decide that at 1 year old, we're going to do it for 1 minute, etc. Okay. Then we have to learn lots of other emotions. Another emotion that's really important is anxiety. And if I said, make your baby anxious, you'd be like, I'm not going to make my baby anxious. I'm going to make them happy. Well, you've already scared them. You make them anxious by doing things like, this little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home, and their little bodies activate into tension, right? And they're like, what's going to happen with the little piggy? And they're so nervous, anxious, worried, whatever word you want to use. But do you see their body is activating into this tension? And then you go, wee, 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 and they go, oh, piggy got home. Round and round the garden. And they're going like, and you can see their little bodies going into this tension state. And they love it because they get the little euphoric feedback and they've learnt. How cool is that? You think about the time we spend with our kids playing these games, doing all these interactions, puppet shows, all of these sorts of things. That lots of things. They're learning language and crossing midlines. And of course, there's so much learning in these spaces. But can you see that almost every game, thing, interaction you do with your little ones has an element of activation of tension and then activation to calm. And this is building resilience. Cool, eh? Actually physically feeling it in the body. Think about all the things that we do. Yeah. Frustration is another emotion that we need to feel in our body and then recognize how to calm down. And that's the only reason we have jigsaws for our little ones, because once they can do their jigsaws easily, they don't want to do it anymore. And they will throw it to the side and they'll ask for another jigsaw that is going to frustrate them. And if you put that piece of jigsaw in for them, you are in trouble because they haven't succeeded. And as frustrated as they get, you can sort of help them sometimes, but they have to be the one to get it. And then they go, oh, I was successful. Awesome. And holding that emotion. Can you see holding that emotion has to be practiced? So we tell them stories about witches kidnapping kids and putting them in gingerbread houses, and you feel them, their bodies are in tension the entire time you're telling them this story. Or we go on a bear hunt, or we play these games and they're in tension and they love it because their body is learning to hold this tolerable state whilst knowing that they're safe because you are there, that person who they trust is there, and their bodies are learning resilience. Cool, eh? As a quick sort of a generalized idea, we know that resilience is reducing, okay, in a generalized space. And now when resilience reduces, so the ability to activate to calm reduces, can you see how if someone feels anxious or worried or stressed or whatever word we want to use, they're going to stay there and they're going to keep going up? Because remember, losing your keys and then you worry about that and you worry about that and you worry about that. So if your body doesn't have the ability to activate to calm, it's going to keep going up. So being over anxious, being more violent than we should be, that is in response to not being able to activate back to calm. So it's the same thing as being over anxious as being inability to calm down. So lack of resilience. So it's the same sort of a thing. Now, remember in all of this, and I'll really quickly just talk about diverse needs, because clearly all of you who are working with diverse needs are going, ding, 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 ding. If we have a young person born who's already of diverse needs, so they're genetically diverse, so they see the world differently, they process light differently, they process sound differently, maybe they have a physical disability, which means they have to try harder at everything and things are more frustrating. Can you see where it's more likely that they could have more moments of overactivation of the stress? When I brought up my kids, I'm a very random person. You can sort of see my high octane sort of parenting style. And, they're little and I'll be like, hello, and like, let's go out there and let's do this, and no routines and slamming pots and turning on lights. And that's how I parented my children. Because my children weren't born of diverse needs, those moments were tolerably activating and I would have built resilience for my kids by the way I parented them, okay? If one of my children had been born already neurodiverse, can you see how those behaviors of a good mum, okay, so I did just fine because my kids weren't of the neurodiverse, but if they were, can you see how each of those moments could have been too much for them and their little bodies could have activated into a higher stress response, not a tolerable stress response? And again, I'm really generalizing, but can we see how someone who's born with neurodiversity is going to need so much more of this to counteract the more likely overactivation that they will experience in the world? And that is why many of our neurodiverse children may activate really fast, not because of the genetics setup of the neurodiversity, but because of their environmental experience that came from being neurodiverse. And that's really important, because if we build resilience in them now, give them moments of tolerable stress and teach them to calm down, they can now get better at calming down. They'll still have the neurodiversity, by the way, still have the neurodiversity, but that's not really what we're wanting to change anyway, because that's a beautiful part of people is their neurodiversity. What we're wanting to change is their overactivation, their lack of resilience. And so if we can work on the resilience, that's not something that's genetically decided. Do you see what I mean? It's something that's environmentally influenced. Now, that's a huge subject, and that's something that I could have taken hours and hours to unpack. But if you work in neurodiversity and you've got these kids, it'll make sense to you. And then there's all those other ripples of kids who their neurodiversity does increase the likelihood of anxiety and all of those sorts of things. So remember, there's more ripples that I can't really go into, but I'm respecting the fact that I'm simplifying it here. So I'll just do another little bit and then we will take questions, because what this is talking about is how do we bring it into our classrooms? And I want us to be really aware of ensuring that our kids get the opportunity to activate to the tolerable. And if you watch kids going off and playing hide and seek, they run off and they hide and they're like totally cool. They're like, this is fun. And then their bodies start to feel that stress response. They start to activate into the stress response. Uh-oh. And they're like tension, and they go, I'm in the cupboard. And they yell out and you run and get them and you get to them and they're going, and they're in the stress response. They're in their activation, their heart rate's up, their lungs are going, they're in the stress response. If you have played this game with kids and you have got there too early, you turn up to the cupboard, you just open the door and they're just sitting there. They will look at you and say, go away. You haven't found me. And you're like, yeah, no, I have. I've found you. No, go away. Do you see what they're telling you? They're telling you that unless I activate into a state of tension, this is not going to be a learning state. So you need to go away and wait for them to meow or make a funny noise. And that will be when you go to them. And I almost guarantee you, I can't be 100% on anything, but 99% guarantee, when they signal to you and you go to them, their body will be in a state of tension, because if it's not fun. And so what we're going to be looking for in our environments is how do we allow our kids to find moments of tolerable stress? And those who are quite resilient will find it. They'll go out and play games at lunchtime. They'll do things to create tolerable stress. They'll ask you to give them a harder question. They'll ask you to do this. They'll put themselves in spaces. They'll want to go and learn the guitar when they've never learned it before, because that's creating tolerable moments of stress. Do you see? But if we've got low resilience, it's much harder to start on that and much harder for them to remember how exciting it is to hit this tolerable and calm down. If you leave the kid in the cupboard for too long because you forgot about them, which is sometimes happens, isn't it? And you get there and you finally get them, they're like, do you see? There's that overactivation of tension in their body, and that overactivation, it's not the worst thing in the world, by the way. We can all have overactivation and we're fine. I've overactivated as a kid, as a child, as a parent, all the time. Like that's part of life. What we're asking is, are we going tolerable and calm down more often than we're going into that intolerable? Do you see? And so as long as we're building that resilience in that space, tolerable, calm down, tolerable, calm down, we're building resilience. Okay, so it's really important. And the last important part of building resilience is it must be done in a state of safety first. So if you've got a kid who, and sorry maths teachers, but if you've got a kid who hates maths and they feel complete failure in maths, please don't think you're going to build resilience in maths, because the minute you mention maths, they're going to be in the intolerable zone. And can you see from this figure that you can't come from the tolerable zone into, you know, from the intolerable to tolerable. So where we will do it is at PE. When we're doing art, when we're doing drama, when we're doing kapa haka. And by the way, kapa haka, can you feel what we're doing physically in kapa haka? We activate to a tolerable level. Generally, it just activates because you're trying to do what everybody else is doing, or the haka actually gets you into it. The poi, you can't do it, you know. But we, that hope space is that beautiful activating of a physical calming down. And that's why doing things like kapa haka, and swimming's another really good one if they can't swim, because they swim and they get into tension and they get to the end of the pool and they go, and a beautiful deep breath takes their body from quite a high level of tension back down to calm. Can you see how those learnings in our body help us then back in our more academic spaces? But it's more likely that we're going to learn resilience out playing handball at, you know, in the backyard, doing it there and teaching them to lose, letting somebody hit them out and telling them they have to get out, and they go into a state of tension and then they calm back down again. That's going to be learnt in places of play, not in our academic spaces so much. Our really resilient kids will learn it in academic spaces, of course, but when we're talking about learning resilience, if we're going to run them through this, it really needs to be done in a safe space, a place where they enjoy, a place where they feel good, which is again something that we don't often compute with putting moments of stress into their happiest times. But they'll love it. They'll absolutely love it. So I'll just put, relationship is the most important thing. And this is really, really important. And when I do long presentations, I get quite on my soapbox about this. I am an expert, and that's why I'm here today. I'm expert in telling you all the stuff, but I could not work with a single child that you're working with and build their resilience because I don't have a relationship. I can have all the knowledge in the world, but can you see what it takes to build resilience is to return to a state of calm. And the way you return someone to a state of calm is you make them feel safe. If I came into your baby and you went like this and I got behind your hand and I went boo, the baby would freak out because I'm not safe. It doesn't matter how many letters I've got behind my name. So really, really important is if we're building resilience, we've got our teacher aides out there, we've got our caretakers, we've got our, the teachers that really get these kids. We've got the people who are the relationships, not the people with extra words behind their name, which theoretically make them experts. In the practice, relationship first. And lots of people have got letters behind their name and other relationship, and that's perfect. But please don't prioritize letters behind name, prioritize relationship, feeling safe. And that's that, because you can see that I couldn't return them back to a state of calm. So I'm not teaching them resilience. So my expertise is good for you, but it's not good to be one-on-one with a kid building resilience. So just throw that one up so you can start putting your questions in if you like. And that's those podcasts. Thank you for introducing them. I've also got a TEDx talk, which is about neuroscience of device zombies, which talks about the impact of devices on the brain. And on engagetraining.co.nz, there is a couple of videos, but the first video you'll see is an animated one about the red brain, green brain, and the stress response, which can be useful to look at if you felt like it. But yeah, any resources on there are your resources. There you go.
Absolute pleasure, Kathryn. Really love hearing you again and again and again. You make me feel so much better about traumatizing my kids on a log flume ride when they were really young. I'm glad I've had your permission to do that to make it tolerable. You've also answered a question. My husband's a caretaker within our school, and the kids gravitate towards him. And I keep saying, oh, you're their attuned adult, which is really nice to hear too. Tracy, I believe some people might have been popping some thoughts in the chat.
Just, Kathryn, I guess to segue from what you were just saying about the what's on the screen now, Joe asked, in terms of building resilience, Do you think that the numbing nature of technology can prevent the development of this?
100%. Absolutely. I'll stop it so we can get some faces up. And the issue with technology is it doesn't take us into that tolerable and back out. We're often holding it when we think about our little ones on screens or all of us on screens. Now, by the way, for a little bit of time, it's fine. We can all be overactivated and that's fine. But we are spending a lot of time on devices and taking away any of those real emotional moments. So yes, devices have a huge impact on resilience. Sorry, neurodiverse again, lots of beautiful things about diverse devices. I'm talking about social media, gaming, that sort of space when I'm talking about the prolonged negative effect. There's lots of really beautiful things about devices, just in case it's sitting there. Yep.
Something else you picked up on, Kathryn, that I noticed, you were talking about wellbeing programs like Pause, Breathe, Smile and that kind of thing. And I liked your question because obviously there are lots of people out there with lots of letters after their name that are in the wellbeing space right now. I liked your question for people to ask, does your method help your body practice? Yeah, so have you got any top tips or things out there that you think, oh yeah, that's a really good way to help people practice other than hide and seek?
And using all those things, and by the way, Mana Potential was really another beautiful program that we can bring into schools that help you. But what we're looking for is we're looking for how often, how long do we see our young people activating into that tension? And see that word tension I'm using, and tension is, I find, a better explanation because it's that body going into that, and it could mean anxiety and worry or anger, but it's a tension space. So how often and how long do they activate into that space? So if you are putting in a program, I want you to just do a real quick, gosh, I noticed that such and such 3 times a day, they seem to absolutely go off the rocker. And when they run off and they climb the tree, it takes them an hour to come down. Do you know, like that sort of thing? And what we'd want to see is if we're putting in these programs that over time, they are running away only once a day now. And when they go and they climb the tree, they're only staying up there for 5 minutes. Do you see what I mean? So I'd want to see that their body is getting better at this practice, not asking them what's the answer to this question. How often we often do the cognitive test. I want to see that their body is getting better at being in this space with their green brain available, which is sort of what we're looking for, isn't it? So that's what I'd ask people to look for if you're implementing a program. How often and how long do they activate that tension? And it should, and generally, be getting less.
Cool. Tracy, was there anything else in the chat?
Yes, just around some of the questions that were posed prior to today. So when we think about what's your role as a teacher, mentor, leader, what are the behaviours we can do every day to build resilience in ourselves and in those around us?
One amazing thing is modelling, right? So our brain learns so much from modelling, but again, respectfully, we have built this idea that we have to be happy every day and that we have to be perfect. And our kids are really lacking the exposure to normal. I just find it fascinating that our kids can't even, and sorry to offend people, and I know I'm going to with this comment, our kids in supermarket trolleys on iPads, our kids at doctors, on their devices. Please, people, they need to observe normal. They need to observe other people being sad. They need to observe other people having fights and saying sorry to each other. They need to observe people tripping over, people of all different shapes, of all different ethnicities. But what we're doing is we're on a device that gives them everything's amazingly happy or everything's amazingly sad. And so what we need to bring into our world is us modeling normal emotions, feeling sad, feeling anxious, bringing those things into our natural teaching spaces. It's a hugely important thing we can do to bring normal into our space, which I think we can do quite effectively.
And I think you're right. I love that word, normalising wellbeing. And at Cognition Education, we do support schools with wellbeing, and we go from the whare tepe whā, the whenua, the land you stand on, and we talk about what's your context, so we contextualise wellbeing for the school. And then, yeah, you're right. It's about how do our systems and environments normalise wellbeing for our students. And that was inspired by some of the work. I don't know if Dr. Helen Street's on the call from Australia, but she did get an invite. Would anybody else like to unmute or say hi to Kathryn at all before we wrap this up? Awesome. It's been so lovely to have everybody join us. I did manage to do a bit of technical wizardry and popped the link to Kathryn and Peel's podcast in the chat. There's also a link to a lot of wellbeing blogs actually in the Cognition Education archives that you can access. There's a really nice one about introducing pets and things like that, and using that for maths and helping all that calm down space. So feel free to look in there. And then there's a website with some practical ideas on how to talk about challenging questions with kids too. So gorgeous to have you. Thank you very much. Kathryn, did you want to finish with anything, or are we going to close it there?
Well, just say thanks everybody. Some cool comments coming through, and do remember that was a snapshot. That was a pebble in 2 ripples. You know, there's 1,000 ripples out there, and you guys are doing this every day. So, you know, thank you so much for what you're out there doing. So thank you.
Cool. I'll hand over to you then, Tracy, to close us off.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Thank you for joining us, everybody. But Kathryn, ngā mihi nui kia koe, especially a big thank you to you for your kōrero this afternoon. As you say, it's sort of one little pebble that's rippling out, and there's a whole lot more that we need to dive into that pool with. So really appreciate it. Given that we began with karakia with the session, I would now like to close with e karakia mutunga. Me no tātou, e te papatua nuku, kua mutu tātou i te mahitahi o te rā. Kia tau te raumangi e, kia mātou, amini.
Thank you, everybody. I believe, Jenny, we're going to hand out the resources too. Nice.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Yeah, lots of thank yous in the chat.